hero, generating, I swear to God, I didn't see this before we talked, generating eye-catching titles that promise more than they deliver for maximum clicks. That's literally what the idea is. I'll read it one more time. Headline hero, generate eye-catching titles that All right. We're back for another episode of the Bad Ideas podcast with Nicole France. Welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here, Nick.
It's so great to have you here. Like I messaged you when you responded to me, I was kind of floored that you'd even consider doing this. So awesome to have you in your brain here, especially with your professional pedigree. Let's talk about some of the things you've done in the last 10 years that at least half of us from the technology space would probably know about directly or indirectly.
Gosh, well, there's probably a through line there, which is content for sure. Some form of thought leadership, a term I have a love-hate relationship with, by the way, and really trying to put the pieces together between what people and businesses really need and what they're trying to accomplish and the technology, how it works and what it can do for them. So I've kind of bounced back and forth between being an industry analyst. I'm a repeat offender on that front. I joke that I'm kind of an accidental marketer because I found my way into technology and product marketing after having started my career as an analyst, which is arguably the wrong way to do it anyway. And I have always just been fascinated by trying to get to the nub of what the real value is and articulating that effectively. Because knowing it is one thing, being able to explain it to someone else, especially someone who is not steeped deeply in that technology world, is often very difficult.
So basically in the age of AI that we're heading into, you're like the most valuable possible person.
I don't know about that.
Curation mind.
I'm definitely a little bit of a skeptic, but I'm also, I have described myself in the past as a cynical optimist. So I guess part of that is skepticism, but the other part is getting really excited about when I see an opportunity to do something cool. And I think with AI, there's a lot to be skeptical about, but I also think at the same time that there's a tremendous opportunity and we are barely scratching the surface on how this stuff is going to change the way we live.
Well, I think that we're opening that door. The Bad Ideas podcast, but we're going to start with an AI discussion. I feel like we're heading into an age of curation almost because you can produce content so fast. It's not about like what you can make. It's about, is it the right content and is it built for the right person and does it fit into the plan? And why it's so cool talking to you is that you see and can think on all three of those levels. I've worked with a lot of folks who touch one or two, but it's just amazing to get to jam on stuff with somebody you can kind of see and put together the whole thing.
Flattery is so effective, Nick, I have to say. But no, it is really a lot of fun. And I think part of what makes that fun is being able to do that with a team of people that can go and execute on that stuff too, right? Because it's one thing to sit and think about it or even to talk about it, and it's another to actually go and do something with it.
Would you say on the AI front, would you say that's kind of what marketing teams look like in the future, where it's almost like a team of editors because they can produce so fast? There's like a strategist and then a team of editors that make sure that what's getting produced fits and hits the right marks.
It's a great question. And I think to a large degree, yes, is the answer. But I think it's going to be really interesting to see what that mix and what that group dynamic looks like, because the reality is creative ideas have always been the fuel of good marketing. And they don't always come from people at the top. And they're certainly not limited to somebody with a certain job title. So I think the really effective companies are going to be the ones that figure out how to build some really dynamic creative teams that probably aren't that large, that maybe have an extended network of other agencies and partners and thought partners even that they work with, customers probably as well, that are coming up with the really creative ideas. And I think what you're hinting at in that question is, to me, a really big deal, which is the AI is not an end in itself. It's a means to an end. And if you're not really clear on what the hell you're trying to do in the first place, it's probably not going to get far.
It's going to confuse you, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, and before generative AI made it, cost almost nothing to produce vast amounts of content, we were already drowning in a sea of noise, right?
Yeah.
And to think that problem doesn't go away is kind of crucial to figuring out how to proceed here, right? Because it's really getting to be more and more difficult. Getting cut through to the humans is the really crucial part. We're going to have to navigate the route that the machines take to helping us do that. But that's probably a whole separate conversation.
Yeah. But glad to have that in the beginning here, because I think it's in the back of everyone's mind. I'm growing something, they're going to hear us jam on a bad idea. They're probably thinking about their own. Is it bad? Is it good? How do I promote it? Oh, I'll just ask ChatGPT for a marketing plan. It's like, don't ask
Yeah, sure.
ChatGPT.
Yeah, it'll just work, right? Yeah.
Nope. No. They need to call you. But without further ado, let's take a look at what we have for today. So you have no idea. I have no idea. We're going to make fun of this, hopefully, for an extended period of time and then see if we can fix it.
Good. I'm guessing it's not the heat sensitive t-shirts.
No, that you shared earlier. And we were talking about, we're doing another segue before we do the bad idea. I wanted to say this before the show, but now we're on the show, so it's content for us. I thought, and this is ironic because the first company I worked at out of college was a daily deal site. This is the age of Groupon. I think Groupon's a really bad business idea, and it grew like crazy because it helped local discovery, but the margins, we'd offer like, $100 for $40, so 60% off, and then split the $40 with the restaurant. So they're promoting at like an 80% discount.
Yeah.
And because Groupon, the deal site model tries to retain customers, you're really creating discount shoppers. You're not doing customer acquisition, which was the value prop, which is why I think it boomed like crazy and then totally fell flat because restaurants caught on pretty quickly.
It's the viral model a bit too literally.
Yeah. The promise was good, though. We'll get new customers in. All we got to do is use a discount. It's cheaper than you spending ad dollars. But they were the worst shoppers. We got that complaint everywhere. Like, these shoppers are no good, and they come in with 3 different deals and try to use them at the same time.
Now, well, I mean, this is the classic story of Bed Bath & Beyond, right? I mean, like, they got themselves into a trap where they could never get rid of the coupons because they had trained almost all of their customers that this was what they should expect and how they should shop. So yeah, it's a fascinating question about systems.
A discount as a service is the service.
Yes.
We will margin ourselves out of existence. Maybe in the age of Temu, it would be better, but I don't know. People are catching on to that.
It's interesting because like in every bad idea, there's something that's good that you can take away from that, and there's definitely the germ of something that could be applied in a different way. And part of that is, how do you build that initial traction?
You're giving me the perfect transition line. Let's find the kernel of value in the craft we're about to look at.
All right.
There we go. All right. Our bad idea for today is headline hero. I swear to God, I didn't see this before we talked. Generating eye-catching titles that promise more than they deliver for maximum clicks. That's literally what the idea is. I'll read it one more time. Headline hero. Generate eye-catching titles that promise more than they deliver for maximum click.
So this is a wordier way of saying clickbait? Is that really?
I think so.
Here?
I think so. I think someone's trying to juice ad revenue, but I mean, this is very eerily similar to our AI discussion at the beginning here. There's going to be a substance issue at some point, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, talk about a race to the middle. I mean, and not like the middle as in you've really hit a huge swath of the market. It's the middle as in totally samey mediocrity. I'm curious. So part of the challenge from an actual copywriting standpoint is how do you write effective headlines that are attention grabbing, but that actually relate to what you're trying to communicate or convey, right? Because you can come up with all kinds of stuff, but it's probably not going to be at all related to the substance of whatever you're trying to get across. The trick is connecting those things,
Yeah, it's the thought. It's not the generation. Wow. Our bad idea validates our need for curators, which is now a theme of this discussion.
Yeah. Here's the thing. So finding the germ in here of what is a good idea. I think there's probably something about that iterative interaction that could be good about a tool like this. One of the things that I have been fascinated by in looking at some of my friends and colleagues who use AI tools really effectively is where you have experts using AI tools to help them do an expert job. And a lot of that is within the process. It's not the end output, and it's being able to really rapidly iterate. And I think that's that's potentially something that could be a good idea in this. But thinking that
So
it's
it's
just
like
gonna automatically
headline
come up with something, I don't know. Not so.
headline brainstorming hero. So
Yeah,
like you
yeah.
have a concept and this gives you different iterations really quickly to see if something catches.
Yeah, I think that could be good.
Yeah.
Because it's got to pass the sniff test, right? I mean, it's got to pass the human curator test, at least to some degree. And maybe what you get is multiple iterations that you actually go and test in a real environment somewhere.
There
That
you
I can see
go.
working.
So it's only 1 degree removed from something with minor potential
Yeah, I think the problem is letting it go kind of
on its own.
unsupervised, not convinced that'll do much for you.
Interesting. We did this. This is 2014. I worked for a military network called Rally Point, and we were trying to build like LinkedIn for the military. And we were advertising it as LinkedIn for the military. And we quickly realized that the military doesn't want LinkedIn because they already have Facebook and LinkedIn. And this was before user-generated content was like a big thing. And we probably spent like $1 million trying to come up with our own headlines and, advertise our way into growth, and everything failed. But we had a little forum on the back of the site that was one of the co-founders' like pet projects. And we started just grabbing quotes from the forum. And it grew like wildfire. Like we took over 40% of the military market in a year just by resharing quotes. But there's like, maybe there's something like a research level here that could be more valuable rather than generating titles.
I like
Maybe
that.
it's like a Reddit crawler, like it's extracting.
Crowdsourcing for sure. Well, I mean, it's interesting because going back to the challenge of generative AI and kind of everything ends up in this like higher volume sea of sameness.
Yeah.
Think about just in an entertainment context, like the things that really capture people's imaginations and that engender a following. I was having this conversation with a friend of mine who was the VP of marketing at HBO, and we were talking about Wes Anderson. Like think about it. There's a Wes Anderson style. You can go to generative AI and produce something in the style of Wes Anderson, but it can only do that because there is a Wes Anderson who already created a Wes Anderson style. And so I think the interesting thing about this is going to be how do you use these tools to really create something that is still distinctive and that has its own personality. And I love the idea of user generated content because, let's face it, like this is like the most awesome form of crowdsourcing, right? You're getting actual people who have actually been there and done that, who are coming up with these pithy, often pretty damn amusing quotes that are what capture people's imagination and attention.
Yeah, I mean, what you're talking about sounds almost like an actual app where people on the back end are like helping brainstorm with you. That's an amazing business idea because people would do it. Like if there was some kind of scoring system where they could rank or get points or credit or something, I think people would do that.
Right. I think you're probably right. Well, some of this exists. I mean, you look at stuff like user testing. We know this exists in some website and product development stuff, where you're actually getting it literally from your customer's mouth, what they think about stuff and why. There's got to be some kind of riff on that would be pretty cool.
Yeah. The other piece, we're sticking with this AI theme because this is the direction that we've been sent on now, and we're down the path. I was having a conversation with a family member over Christmas about some study that talked about the ability for the brain to process information and how the quote was something like 10 bits a second. And I think if you evaluate the brain's ability to read and process one thing, which is one channel, maybe that's true. But the amount of information you see at any given time is an infinite amount. And the reason I'm bringing that up is because all of our technology is still binary. So as powerful as AI is and the amount of information it can see, it still doesn't work quite like the brain, which I think validates our need for curation because the history your brain as a writer, as a communicator has is still inaccessible to AI that's only been around and training for 3 or 4 years and doesn't have a feedback loop. Like other than you prompting for more information, that's it. Like it doesn't know what the response was. It doesn't know what the data says people liked. It doesn't know how it was presented. And I think all that stuff is discounted when people are like, all these jobs are getting replaced. the brain's still the winner, at least for now.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely am with you on the side of the brain. It is going to be interesting because I think we are probably not too far off those feedback loops coming. But what I wonder is if we're going to end up in an exaggerated form of this ultra short-term cycle thinking, which is honestly one of the difficulties with A/B testing that already exists even before generative AI, right? Is that you're so narrow in what you're testing that you're sort of optimizing the subsystem at the expense of the overall output, like the overall objectives that you have. So I don't know, but seems plausible that could be an outcome of this actually gaining a feedback loop. I think, by the way, I love human cognition, hobby subject area. Yeah. I'm anything like an expert here, but David Eagleman is a great author on some of this stuff. So he writes a lot about, among other things, the different parts of your brain and how they work, and those autonomic systems, so that are busy processing stuff beyond your conscious mind. Yeah. This is super fascinating. Of course, there's also Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, or the lighter version of that, The Undoing Project by Michael Lewis. Yeah. These are all super fascinating ways of thinking about this stuff, because I think this does come into this bigger, very pointed example of a bad business idea that we've been given here, but what it's trying, I think, to do, which is how do you really get to the audience in a way that's going to get the kind of reaction that you want? And there's so much here that is really about understanding the broader context of what people are looking for, where they are, what they're interested in, what their motivations are. And yeah, as you say, I don't think AI in the very near term is going to be able to do that in anything like a rich and varied way that, good human curators can, especially when they're putting those different elements of customer journey together effectively.
Yeah. It's one of those interesting things that at least the last 5 to 10 years has been really, really hard to measure. I think it's easier now, but it's still not centralized enough for a machine to consume it and learn it as well as we do, which is, I think it's also why it's so difficult for people to hire content marketers, which is why the market doesn't really know who's good and who's not. It's like, they seem confident. This might work.
And part of the problem too is that this is one of the biggest challenges in content generally, is that our terminology is frankly pretty damn poor, so whether we're talking about the titles that people have or even what the hell it is we're producing, we tend to have some very, very generic labels that miss some really important detail, so a content producer, a content marketer, a writer, all of these things kind of get jumbled together, and they still don't give you the level of detail that you really need about who's got what skills and how they think about stuff and what they're actually capable of doing. And I think importantly, especially if you're building a marketing organization or you're trying to create an effective marketing machine of some kind, it's how these people work together too. And again, whether they're in-house or a combination, it's that collaboration and that interaction, which is actually, I think, key to success.
Yeah, pairing the best of the machine with the best of the brain.
Yeah, and the right people, the right mix of people too.
Do the companies that get it right, this is a big question, do the companies that get it right create a smaller world? And what I mean by that is, because there's so much noise, because people are trying to create headline hero generating titles, like
really, really narrow. Yeah.
Does that bury so many companies in volume that the people really delivering value, really reaching the customer, create kind of like a smaller ecosystem of like brands and experiences that we consume?
It's a really fascinating question. So if anybody is familiar with Scott Brinker's eye chart of all MarTech, this is MarTech advisor stuff, and I think we're around or maybe have surpassed like 10,000 individual vendor different MarTech solutions here. The classic problem is that it's way easier to sell a point solution to a marketer than to sell something that's actually going to tackle the bigger challenge, right? I think the problem is that the world is already very large. And if you don't cast an appropriately sized net in how you think about the audience that you're trying to reach and the ways that you engage them, and I say ways very intentionally, because I think you need multiple strategies always, especially if you're going to try to build that all important customer lifetime value, which is what leads to a sustainable business, right? It's not just about an individual click through or pushing short-term transactions. it's that too, but it's that in the broader context of how do you build a loyal customer base that keeps coming back and that talks about you and that is, creating a center of gravity that brings more in. So I think the challenge is that you have to define a view of the world that is broad enough that you have scope to operate, but that is discrete enough that you're not constantly distracted by the unending number of possible things you can do.
Yeah. Interesting. Big answer to a big question. I think if we simplify that into a yes or no, that's a leans yes, because companies are going to have to find a way to compete. And if they don't, they're going to be buried.
Yeah. Well, and I guess, yes. I mean, do you make a smaller world? I guess yes, because ultimately you have to pick who you care about, right? You have to pick your audiences.
You can't have anyone or everyone anymore.
Yeah. Well,
Blue ocean is gone.
Trying to meet everybody's needs is famously ineffective.
Yeah. What I think is interesting, we were talking about this before the show too, is that age of AI and age of cryptocurrency are happening at the same time. And I think crypto is still a toy largely, but the capabilities it brings to us, like truly localized banking, like in your phone instead of like through an institution, is going to empower people to kind of opt into the ecosystems they want to participate in, rather than like going through one of three big banks and competing or buying from the vendors they support. So I think whether companies win by transcending the madness of AI-generated content, or they win by localizing enough that they become a part of one of these ecosystems people opt into. I think we're moving away from everyone building massive like blue ocean companies on Facebook in a year and towards something that's like much more specific to a much more localized group, because we're all connected now. Being connected is cheap, so we can have more optionality and we can select something a little closer to us rather than playing in these big, wide open marketplaces like Amazon.
Yeah, I think you're right. Well, I think it's the only way to operate with any reasonable scale, right? I mean, humans don't understand infinity. We just don't. It's a concept that we put a name to, but we don't really fundamentally grasp, right? You have to make things more finite in order to be able to really comprehend and work effectively within them. And that applies as much to which markets you choose to go after as anything else. And I think you're right. I mean, I find it fascinating on the kind of human and social side as well. What are the communities that we opt into? Because in some senses, as you say, they're very sort of geographically local, but they don't have to be physically co-located.
Yeah.
They don't have to be nearby. They might be conceptually related and dispersed around a huge area of the world, right? It's where you go to find these people. Where do you go to find these communities that you really want to and feel a part of? I think, you have on one side this kind of fragmentation of media in general that I think is really creating some very interesting dynamics. I mean, there's not really a pop culture anymore. There's like a bazillion different versions of pop culture.
Yeah, they're self-selecting.
You're plugged into.
Yeah.
And yet at the same time, I think there's this very fundamentally human desire to feel like a part of a community, to be part of a community. And I am curious to see how these things kind of play out, because you could argue that they're slightly opposing forces, and which, is this just the dynamic of the society that we live in today? How is it going to change going forward? I don't really know.
Well, it's always, I mean, this is just assumption, but like studying history, it always kind of goes this way. You have a populace that outgrows its geographical location and then builds resources and systems to expand, and they localize, and then those grow, and then they do it again. And I think if Mr. Musk has his way, the next again will be on Mars, and that'll force us to dramatically change the way we share and consume info.
Talk about supply chain challenges. I mean, that's going to, yeah.
That's where the money is, though. Invest in the boring company if you can.
Yeah, there you go.
But I think the main reason why I'm so excited to have you here is in an age where communication is super, super cheap and widely misunderstood, the people that know how to do it become the kings. I think the last 15 years, it's been the people who empower communication, your Facebooks, your Googles, that allow you to reach tens of millions of people. But now that's cheap and it's commodified and it's known. And there's so many players that all, like TikTok, Facebook, they all have massive reach potential. So it's no longer about I reached a lot of people. It's about I impacted a lot of people.
Yeah.
And the folks like you who can show us how to do it the right way and make it meaningful become the valuable ones.
I will say for the record, I definitely don't have the answers for how to do that. I feel like part of the that it's a constantly moving target too, right? This is dynamic and changing by definition. I feel though, coming back to this idea of curation that you talked about, Nick, and I think that's the root of what makes anything effective here. It's kind of understanding your audience, and sometimes you can have a kind of instinct that an audience is there before you actually know who they are and where they are. And sometimes it's a question of just finding them, And that's one of the things that makes this cheap and easy communication so amazing, is that it's a hell of a lot easier to do that now, certainly than it was, even 25 years ago. It's amazing, right? But you have to have something of substance there. It's not just enough to know there's an audience. You have to have something meaningful to connect with them on. And, all the better when there's mutual benefit in doing that. That's what I think at root, that's what makes for successful businesses of any kind.
We did this. This will make you laugh. We're talking about getting to the root. Sometimes you stumble upon it, every now and then I get lucky too. But we've been, so our company, Pinchforth, we've been finding different ways to explain what it does for the last 7 years. And it's a grind. And we get super fired up when a really good lead comes up. Yes. And we fist pump and they saw us and they understood.
Yeah.
My wife and I ran into a practical issue over the weekend. And I was like, why is there not a solution for this? So I put up a Craigslist ad for $5 and said, I can solve this for you, phone number. And that was the whole thing. And got 5 phone calls in the first 24 hours of people who needed help with it immediately.
Is it me? That is
but
amazing.
to your point, when something fits, it doesn't matter how you're promoting it. Some people watching the show didn't know Craigslist is still operational, but there's a market there.
Yeah, well, and it's almost kind of like retro throwback now, the Craigslist approach, but that's what appeals to certain people, right? Yeah, it is really interesting. Well, I often talk about narrowcasting, because really what you don't necessarily want everybody to be hearing what you're saying. What you want is the right people to be hearing what you're saying. And it's about getting them, getting to those folks and building a meaningful relationship with the right people, as opposed to necessarily having awareness that everybody is part of, I mean, it depends on the business too, don't get me wrong, but it's funny because I was looking on Threads this morning and there's, just I randomly fall into the trap of wasting my time doing the doom scrolling, but not so much doom scrolling in this case. It was really interesting because there was this guy that was talking about his experience dating, and he, had been divorced, and he's telling the story in Threads of how he got so fed up with all the dating apps and everybody said the same thing and it was all kind of bullshit. So he did this kind of satirical post that he wrote that he's just sent to a couple friends about the 4 reasons why you should date me kind of thing. It might not be fancy. It's not the great big one with a view because that went to the wife and the divorce, but I have one. It's my own. It has a kitchen. I can cook, I have a job and it might not be the best job ever, but it's good. It supports me. I enjoy doing it, blah, blah, blah. So it was his key attributes, and it was all done very tongue in cheek. And some friend of his was like, oh, when are you going to post this? And he's like, no, I'm not, what are you talking about? I'm not going to do it. Well, so his friend posted it on Craigslist for him. And that was how he ended up meeting the woman who he's been with for 15 years. And he's like, he got a few replies. There was only one that he responded to. And that was it. I mean, it's kind of fascinating and it struck me, I laughed. I'm like, oh, this is really good content marketing. And I can't believe that that's even how I framed it in my own mind. But, it's about putting the right things out there. And people talk about Easter eggs or breadcrumbs, I mean, it's about having it somewhere that the right person or people are going to see it. And I think that's ultimately what it comes down to.
That's super well said. So looking at a headline generator, it's not so much about the headline, it's about the fit with the customer and your product. So it's living between that trajectory, not just generating something that wins attention.
Absolutely.
Is that kind of what we're saying?
It needs to win attention too, but it needs to win attention in a broader context. This is why great newspaper editors historically were really good at coming up with headlines, part of it was, how do you do this in the editorial style of the news organization that's presenting it? How do you really get that cut through with your readership?
It just hit me in the face. There's a business version of this that's not AI generated. We have to spend 2 minutes talking about. How is Red Bull succeeding? Like, what does F1 have to do with caffeine? I don't understand, but it's amazing. Like, what's your
rush,
thought?
Nick. It's the adrenaline rush.
That's it.
I think it is. I think some of it is living on the edge, and I'm fascinated by this example, by the way, too. I mean, it's also kind of interesting that you have almost this whole brand of things that is kind of Red Bull experiences and extreme sports that arguably kind of overshadows the actual energy drink itself.
Yeah.
I mean, but I also would say baseball cards were originally the thing that sold chewing gum and have become the thing that has value long after the chewing gum is gone, right? Nobody even remembers the chewing gum companies, but they remember the baseball card. So it's not like this kind of thing is unprecedented, where the tool that you use for marketing ends up having value, perceived value that is much, much higher than the thing you were originally trying to sell in the first place. I think what Red Bull does so effectively is tapping into a psyche and an energy and, almost kind of like an aspirational way of living,
Mm-hmm.
And that is both literal and vicarious, probably more so.
I find it super fascinating when you see someone in like a wingsuit and there's a Red Bull sign on their back, and you're like, that guy definitely didn't drink a Red Bull before,
before he
flying through,
Probably not. I don't know, but is that what he drinks to come down after having the adrenaline rush? I don't know.
Yeah, maybe. But I mean, like, your F1 drivers are some of the best athletes on the planet. They're not drinking Red Bull before they drive.
Yeah.
But Red Bull has found a way to randomly generate content and somehow kind of stay in front of the right audience.
But I think part of the reason that they've been able to build and maintain such a loyal audience is because there's an integrity in what they're doing,
It's all extreme. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well,
so it is the right people.
Free fall from space, right? Like, that was nuts, but awesome.
Yeah. So it is the right people. So you're saying it can be random as long as it randomly engages the right people.
I think there's an alignment there. There's an overlap. And who knows how big the overlap is in reality between people that are excited by Red Bull racing or extreme anything and actually drinking Red Bull. I would venture to say it's probably pretty good.
Pretty good. I think that's the perfect conclusion to our discussion on the headline hero and AI, because AI will not know if it's the right person. It can only evaluate the headline it gives you against the prompt you gave it. So curators are king.
Especially in a world where we're going for the audiences that matter and not all audiences everywhere all at once.
So when are you speaking next? When can people come listen to you and learn from you?
I'm in my hermit mode at the moment, so I don't have anything scheduled, but I'm always around. I'm always up for a good conversation. As you know, this is my weak point. So
I'm so lucky. So, but you're encouraging people to reach out on LinkedIn or
absolutely.
email? How do they
find not hard to find.
All right. We'll get a link out. And this is really amazing. Thank you for letting me pick your brain and talk about something so ridiculous. But I think we touched on some areas that are really important to a lot of companies trying to find a new way to compete. Hearing it from you makes it a little easier to understand.
Nick, this was so much fun. Anytime.
Thank you so much.